Hey everybody! Welcome back to Chapterbook Storytime with me, Dave. I've got another two-parter here for you today, and this one is a little bit similar to Ricky Tikki Tavi, if you guys listened to that one when I read that a few weeks back. This is a short story. It is set in India, and it involves a snake. And that's where the similarities end. This is a short story called Poison, and it is by Roald Dahl, famous children's book author. But before Roald Dahl was writing his children's books in the 70s and 80s, he was a prolific adult short story writer, publishing dozens and dozens and dozens of short stories, and they are fantastic. They have that same sort of strange Roald Dahl humor that you find in his children's novels, but they are totally adult. The one I'm going to read today is safe for families to listen to. There's not anything super violent in it or any really adult situations. Like I said, it takes place in India, and it's about two men who are roommates, and one of them comes home in the evening to find his roommate laying on the bed not moving. And a snake is involved. A snake called a krait. Krait. And so now I'm going to read the first half of this fun, suspenseful little short story for you. And you can decide if you like Roald Dahl's adult stuff or if you would rather stick with his children's books. Shall we? Let's do it. Poison by Roald Dahl. It must have been around midnight when I drove home, and as I approached the gates of the bungalow, I switched off the headlamps of the car so the beam wouldn't swing in through the window of the side bedroom and wake Harry Pope. But I needn't have bothered. Coming up the drive, I noticed his light was still on, so he was awake anyway, unless perhaps he dropped off while reading. I parked the car and went up the 5 steps to the balcony, counting each step carefully in the dark so I wouldn't take an extra one, which wasn't there when I got to the screen doors into the house itself and switched on the light in the hall. I went across the door to Harry's room, opened it quietly, and looked in. He was laying on the bed, and I could see he was awake, but he didn't move. He didn't even turn his head toward me, but I heard him say, "Timber, Timber, come here." He spoke slowly, whispering each word carefully, separately, and I pushed the door right open and started to go quickly across the room. "Stop! Wait a minute, Timber." I could hardly hear what he was saying. He seemed to be straining enormously to get the words out. "What's the matter, Harry?" "Shh," he whispered. "Shh! For God's sake, don't make a noise. Take your shoes off before you come nearer. Please, do as I say, Timber." The way he was speaking reminded me of George Barling after he got shot in the stomach, when he stood leaning against a crate containing a spare airplane engine, holding both hands on his stomach and saying things about the German pilot in just the same hoarse-straining half-whisper Harry was using now. "Quickly, Timber, but take your shoes off first." I couldn't understand about taking off the shoes, but I figured that if he was ill, as he sounded, I had better humor him, so I bent down and removed the shoes and left them in the middle of the floor. Then I went over to his bed. "Don't touch the bed! For goodness sake, don't touch the bed!" He was still speaking like he'd been shot in the stomach, and I could see him lying there on his back with a single sheet covering 3/4 of his body. He was wearing a pair of pajamas with blue, brown, and white stripes, and he was sweating terribly. It was a hot night, and I was sweating a little myself, but not like Harry. His whole face was wet, and the pillow around his head was sodden with moisture. It looked like a bad go of malaria to me. "What is it, Harry?" "A crate," he said. A crate! Oh my gosh, why'd it bite you? How long ago? Shut up, he whispered. Listen, Harry, I said, and leaned forward and touched his shoulder. We've got to be quick. Come on now, quickly, tell me where it bit you. He was lying there very still and tense, as though he were holding on to himself hard because of sharp pain. I haven't been bitten, he whispered. Not yet. It's on my stomach. The snake is lying there, asleep. I took a quick pace backwards. I couldn't help it, and I stared at his stomach, or rather, at the sheet that covered it. The sheet was rumpled in several places, and it was impossible to tell if there was anything underneath. You don't really mean there's a crate lying on your stomach right now? I swear it. Well, how'd it get there? I shouldn't have asked the question because it was easy to see he wasn't fooling. I should have told him to keep quiet. I was reading, Harry said, and he spoke very slowly, taking each word in turn and speaking it carefully so as not to move the muscles of his stomach. Lying on my back, reading, and I felt something on my chest, behind the book, sort of tickling. Then out of the corner of my eye, I saw this little crate sliding over my pajamas. Small, about 10 inches. I knew I mustn't move. Couldn't have anyway. Lay there watching it. Thought it would go over top of the sheet. Harry paused and was silent for a few moments. His eyes looked down along his body toward the place where the sheet covered his stomach, and I could see he was watching to make sure his whispering wasn't disturbing the thing that lay there. There was a fold in the sheet, he said, speaking more slowly than ever now, and so softly I had to lean close to hear him. See it? It's still there. It went under that. I could feel it through my pajamas, moving on my stomach. Then it stopped moving, and now it's lying there in the warmth. Probably asleep. I've been waiting for you. He raised his eyes and looked at me. How long ago? Hours, he whispered. Hours and bloody hours and hours. I can't keep still much longer. I've been needing to cough. There was not much doubt about the truth of Harry's story. As a matter of fact, it wasn't a surprising thing for a crate to do. They hang around people's houses, and they go for the warm places. The surprising thing was that Harry hadn't been bitten. The bite is quite deadly, except sometimes when you catch it at once, and they kill a fair number of people each year in Bengal, mostly in the villages. All right, Harry, I said, and now I was whispering too. Don't move, and don't talk anymore, unless you have to. You know it won't bite unless it's frightened. We'll fix it in no time. I went softly out of the room in my stocking feet and fetched a small, sharp knife from the kitchen. I put it in my trouser pocket, ready to use instantly in case something went wrong while we were still thinking out a plan. If Harry coughed, or moved, or did something to frighten the crate and got bitten, I was going to be ready to cut the bitten place and try to suck the venom out. I came back to the bedroom, and Harry was still lying there very quiet and sweating all over his face. His eyes followed me as I moved across the room into his bed, and I could see he was wondering what I'd been up to. I stood beside him, trying to think of the best thing to do. Harry, I said, and now when I spoke, I put my mouth almost to his ear so I wouldn't have to raise my voice above the softest whisper. I think the best thing to do is for me to draw the sheet back very, very gently. Then we could have a look first. I think I could do that without disturbing it. Don't be a fool! There was no expression in his voice. He spoke each word too slowly, too carefully, and too softly for that. The expression was in the eyes and around the corners of the mouth. Why not? The light would frighten him. It's dark under there now. then how about whipping the sheep back quick and brushing it off before it has time to strike? Why don't you get a doctor? Harry said. The way he looked at me told me I should have thought of that in the first place. A doctor! Of course! That's it! I'll get Dr. Genderby! I tiptoed out to the hall, looked up Genderby's number in the book, lifted the phone, and told the operator to hurry. Dr. Genderby, I said. This is Timber Woods. Oh, hello, Mr. Woods. You're not in bed yet? Look, could you come around at once and bring serum for a crate bite? Who's been bitten? The question came so sharply it was like a small explosion in my ear. No one yet, but Harry Pope's in bed, and he's got one lying on his stomach, asleep under the sheet on his stomach. For about 3 seconds there was silence on the line. Then, speaking slowly, not like an explosion now, but slowly, precisely, Genderby said, Tell him to keep quite still. He is not to move or to talk. You understand? Yes, of course. I'll come at once. He rang off, and I went back to the bedroom. Harry's eyes watched me as I walked across his bed. Genderby's coming. He says for you to lie still. What in goodness name does he think I'm doing? Look, Harry, he said no talking. Absolutely no talking. Either of us. Well, why don't you shut up then? When he said this, one side of his mouth started twitching with rapid little downward movements that continued for a while after he finished speaking. I took out my handkerchief, and very gently I wiped the sweat off his face and neck, and I could feel the slight twitching of the muscle, the one he used for smiling, as my fingers passed over it with the handkerchief. To be continued next week. Will Harry Pope be bitten? Is there really a snake? Stay tuned to find out.